Maggie, Holland, thank you so much for being here today on Drinking with Jen.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here.
How's the weather in Seattle?
Actually, it is a very spooky, foggy day where I am at. It's very foggy. It feels like an October day, but
Okay.
I'm a spooky girl, so I kind of like it.
All right. Well, quite surprising, right? Overcast in the Pacific Northwest.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and we haven't had any rain to kind of knock this fog down, so here we are, spooky in
Okay.
January. Yeah.
Spooky. So, as you know, we start every episode of Drinking with Jen with what are you drinking? Are you drinking anything today as we
Yeah.
chat?
Yeah, I'm having a coffee. It's still early over here on the West Coast. Yeah.
All right. I'm
Yep.
also having coffee. I'm having a cold brew.
Mm.
Just sounded good today. I sometimes I like cold brew in the afternoon.
Yep.
Just like a little for whatever reason. I like hot coffee in the morning,
Yep.
and then sometimes like a cold brew in the afternoon is a nice little
Yeah,
switch up. So, Jem, as
absolutely.
you're listening to this wonderful conversation here with Maggie today, whatever you're sipping on, I hope that you enjoy it and it's tasty. So
Hmm.
we are going to tackle triangulation today. And
Hmm.
this is a topic that I think is really underrepresented. And that's why I wanted to chat about it today. It's definitely something I've experienced, definitely something that my ex is a master of and continues to be, as I hear stories from other people. Something that I've experienced in the workplace,
Hmm.
and I think it's something that people don't, or something that I also experienced as a child. If you've ever heard of the golden child syndrome or the golden child scenario, we'll get into that a little bit later. But this is something that, as I've been talking with listeners, I'm like, oh, I'm going to record with this amazing therapist from out in Seattle about triangulation. And most people say, what's that?
Hmm.
And to me, that was the perfect answer. If I know I'm going to bring something on the podcast and people haven't heard of it, it makes it really exciting for me and like reaffirms that this is great that we're bringing some awareness. And that's why I wanted to bring on an expert like you. And I found you because you wrote this amazing article on it in Choosing Therapy. And that's
Hmm.
how I discovered you. And you agreed to come on and share your wisdom and your experience and your expertise with us. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Where would you like to start? Should we like defining triangulation as a
Mhm.
generality and then kind of dig into it a little bit more?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great place to start. Okay. So triangulation is essentially where there are two people that are disagreeing or looking at a situation differently. And then a third person gets brought in to kind of tip the scales one way or another. There are definitely situations where triangulation isn't totally unhealthy. I say that with a caveat because that still brings in indirect communication, and really the two original people just got to figure out how do we talk about this together. But if this is used in the hands of a narcissist, it's really, really toxic. It becomes a manipulation tool. It becomes a way that they can control the situation to alter the other person's feelings and thoughts about themselves and, really perception on reality. So it can kind of be a gaslighting tool as well. So, triangulation, it happens. It happens in relationships where there isn't necessarily a narcissist. But if you put it in the hands of a narcissist, it is a really toxic, malicious manipulation tool.
Yeah, and what I think is okay, so you said a couple of things. First of all,
Mhm.
gaslighting. If you're not familiar with
Mhm.
gaslighting, you can go. I have a ton of different episodes with therapists, psychotherapists, and then I actually have a solo episode earlier in season 1 of Drinking with Gin that you can go back and listen to. It was the Merriam-Webster word of the year for 2022. That's how
Mhm.
big gaslighting has become.
Mhm.
And so when you explain triangulation, I that was a very helpful description and definition.
Mhm.
Um, what I think is interesting is a lot of people are familiar with this concept, but unfamiliar with how it is used by narcissists, as you said, as a very toxic, manipulative tool.
Mhm.
And I've been on the receiving end of it, like I said. And um, what's interesting is this concept has
Mhm.
become so popular that even Taylor Swift sings about it in
Yep.
her song Anti-Hero. Of course
Yep.
she does, because she's so prolific. But
Yes.
that's, when she says, so if anybody, for the Swifties out there, in her song
Mhm.
Anti-Hero, she says the word narcissist. In fact, I think she says covert narcissist.
Yep.
And then she also says, everybody agrees, everybody agrees. That's what, in that phrasing or in those lyrics, she is describing triangulation. That's one of the things. And my ex is famous for that. Like, well, I've been talking, if he's in a disagreement with somebody, and a lot of times, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Maggie, but a lot of times narcissism is so stemmed in insecurity
Mhm.
that, and when they know that they don't have a leg to stand on with their argument, they'll
Mhm.
say, well, I talked to all these people and they all
Mhm.
agree with me and you're
Yep.
wrong.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, most of the time as people think about narcissism, they think about grandiose narcissism, like overt narcissism. And, that's more what's in the media. That's more what's talked about. And that's, this like very, what seems like an inflated sense of ego. And, it takes up a lot of space. It takes all the air out of the room. Right. But no matter what the kind of narcissism, at the root of that disorder is that there is such a fragile sense of self esteem, like such a fragile sense of self in general, that these behaviors, which include triangulation, any manipulation that a narcissist does, is to make up for the fact that they can't hold their own sense of self. Right. And if you can't know that no matter what happens, I'm still me, whatever it is okay, then you can't be wrong, right? You can't stand in the knowledge that if I am wrong in this argument, everything's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. It might hurt, it might be uncomfortable. If you have no sense of self, every single argument it's a fight for survival to be right. And so it doesn't really matter if you are being irrational as you bring those third people in. It doesn't matter if it is a total lie of what you are saying that third party is saying. It is just a battle of survival because they cannot be wrong because they have no sense of self to cling to at the end of the day. So they require other people to, say they're right or to end an argument believing that they're right because they have nothing to return home to within themselves.
Mm. They
Hmm.
have nothing to return home to within themselves.
Hmm.
That's really powerful.
Yeah.
I mean, that hit. So I think that's a really good understanding of the why, right? Like
Yep.
why they need to have this desire to always win, right?
Yep.
We hear that it's control. A
Hmm.
lot of things
Yep.
always come back to control for them. They have to win and have control. And those two
Yep.
things can be really um closely tied together.
Yeah.
So if we go back to the foundation of triangulation
Yep.
and how you described it and bringing in that third person.
Yep.
So now we have a triangle, right? Like
Yep.
that's the best way to, it's like such a good, easy visual. I'm like, okay, they actually came up with a word to describe this, manipulative tactic. That makes
Yep.
sense. So you've got three people in this triangle
Yep.
and they
Hmm.
each kind of have a role,
Yep.
right? So
Mhm.
what are those three roles within that triangle? And then what part do each of those roles play?
For sure. Yep. So usually the first person that we start with as we're formulating this triangle in our mind is this person called the persecutor. I don't love the language of triangulation, so I'm going to give a couple other options as well. But there's the persecutor, but this is the instigator. This is the quote unquote bad guy. Like, this is the person that did the thing, right? Um, and the persecutor is acting on the victim. Again, I don't love this language, but the person that is receiving the persecutor's actions, right? So these two people are having a disagreement, having an unhealthy dynamic, something's happening. And so then it becomes a triangle when we bring the third person in, and this is called the rescuer. It can also be called the mediator, if that's language you like better. But basically, there's two original people where something's happening. And a third person is brought in to kind of referee, to make a decision, to judge who's right, who's wrong. Um, And in these roles, I do like to really emphasize if a narcissist is in the fray, as we're talking about these, a narcissist can actually be playing any of these roles, right? So let's look at that one real quick, right? So if the narcissist is the person doing the action, they might be dismissing someone's feelings. They might be taking up all the air out of the room and making sure somebody is left out of a conversation. And then the other two roles follow, right? There's also times when the narcissist can be in the victim role. And so that is, oh, woe is me. This person is being so mean and awful to me. And they might share this with the rescuer to get pity, to get reassurance, to get, that saying, oh, no, you didn't do anything wrong. You're wonderful. You would never do anything like that, to kind of build up this lack of a sense of self, right? And then, but a narcissist can also play in the rescuer role too, in the mediator role. Now, oftentimes this person will get pulled in if one of the other people know that the narcissist is always going to take their side. That can be for control too. It's also not uncommon for a narcissist to insert themselves as the rescuer or the mediator, so that they get to be right. They get to make the ultimate call. They get to say, this is the correct answer. Look to me. I have all the answers. I know what's going on. So we have these three roles that make up a triangle. And a narcissist, quite frankly, can play any of them for different motivations and hoping to influence different outcomes. But ultimately, there is the persecutor and the victim that having a disagreement. And then a third person's brought in to referee, to rescue, to mediate. So that's kind of the basis of the triangle. Mhm.
Okay, so I have a question.
Sure.
Is it possible, because I feel like I've seen this happen,
Hmm.
where the narcissist, because they love to play the victim and they
Hmm.
also need to be the hero because they
Yep.
need to win and have
Hmm.
that control. In a triangulation, can they start as the persecutor, become the victim to elicit that pity, make themselves, the victim, victimize themselves to kind of paint
Hmm.
that picture so that they can flip back into the persecutor and be victorious?
Absolutely. Yes, 100%. So as we're thinking about, triangulation that happens in all relationships, even healthy ones accidentally, that's more because we can't tolerate the discomfort of arguments, normal human emotions that are tough to sit with. But with a narcissist, this always comes back to control, right? So if they're sitting in the persecutor role, and they're watching the input from the rescuer and it is not going their way, yep, they're going to flip to whatever role they need to play to maintain control of the situation and to get the outcome that they're looking for. And so, yes, 100% in a triangulation situation, a narcissist will put themselves in whatever role puts them to the best advantage to maintain control, to get the outcome they want. Yeah, they can slide around in this
Mm.
triangle. Mhm.
And while that's kind of the ultimate goal, right, is for them to
Yep.
win, have control, to use these manipulative tactics. I love in
Mhm.
your article that you highlighted that there's several different reasons why a
Mhm.
narcissist might use triangulation. And so
Mhm.
one, which I think this is really interesting, it's to distract from the actual issue at hand.
Mhm.
And this is I think this is a common tactic that's used, especially if and when, and if you've done this before, if you have tried to um, confront, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
a narcissist on their bad behavior,
Yep.
it doesn't go well. And I
No.
think this is when they can use triangulation to pull in a third person
Yep.
to distract from the real issue at hand and turn it into something completely different from
Mhm.
what you were trying to accomplish to begin
Mhm.
with.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. And so I always like to have people look at there are so many ways that a narcissist can use a manipulation tool to get that outcome, right? One of them can absolutely be to distract. One of them can be to make you question your reality, coming back to that gaslighting again. It can be to ultimately like establish a power dynamic of like, I know more than you. People agree with me more than they agree with you. They've got my back and not your back. So you should be scared and you should do what I say. but it can 100% also be just to distract, which is a really hard one to pin down because if you're in a triangle, you're focused on what the conversation is. To any healthy person, we're focused on what is this thing that we're disagreeing on and how do we get to a place of understanding. But to a narcissist, rationality doesn't always apply. Some of it is just avoiding the possibility I could be wrong. So let's just distract. If I know I'm wrong and I cannot admit that I am wrong, then I'm just going to distract you so that you pay attention to something else, which could be this made up argument that you're now in a triangle on. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I always have so many questions,
It's okay.
especially for therapists, because y'all have so much just expertise and experience in this area. And with your passion for helping people with narcissist abuse recovery, and
Mm-hmm.
really, I love when you go and look at her website, Jem, you're going to see that Maggie is really passionate and focused on helping and supporting women,
Mm-hmm.
women with stress and anxiety. And a lot of times that comes on the backside of, or comes along with narcissist abuse. So when you check out her work, and do you do remote sessions?
I do. I only do remote sessions.
Oh,
Yeah.
wonderful. So anybody from all over the world can
Oh, I
work with you.
wish. No, you have to be in Washington State.
Okay.
We have some pretty
Because of your
antiquated
license.
licensing laws. Yeah, it's
Okay.
silly. But if you're in
Okay.
Washington, reach out. I'd love to have sessions with you. Probably. We'll see
Perfect.
if it's a good fit. But
Yes. Yes, yes, yes.
yeah.
Okay, so Washington State people can work
Hmm.
with Maggie, can work with you one-on-one
Hmm.
in a remote scenario. Okay.
Yep.
So now I of course lost my question because I got so excited to send people from all over the world to work with you, all over
Yes.
Washington State.
Yes.
Um, as we think about that triangulation and kind of
Hmm.
the reasons and the purposes, I wish I had that other question, so I'm gonna have to shift gears for a second.
Sure.
Um, sometimes that third person, this
Hmm.
was my question. How likely
Yes.
is it for the narcissist? I imagine that they're very strategic
Hmm.
about the person that they are choosing to pull into
Hmm.
this triangulation.
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
How often is it that they pick somebody that is close
Hmm.
to the person that's experiencing the narcissist abuse?
Hmm. Honestly, usually that is who they're going to aim for more than anybody else, right? And so if you've been in a casual conversation, let's say you're in a romantic relationship with a narcissist and your best friend came over this week and was maybe hinting at, I don't agree with this behavior, I don't agree with that thing in the world or whatever it is. Narcissists file that information away. And if an argument about that topic ever comes up again, let's bring back Taylor Swift, right? Like, let's say that you love Taylor Swift and your narcissistic partner doesn't love Taylor Swift, right? Thinks she's overrated. Oh, that hurts my heart. But let's say your best friend comes over and hints at the fact that she also thinks Taylor Swift is overrated. Taylor, if you're listening, I don't think that girl. But if you then get into an argument with your narcissistic partner later that Taylor Swift is overrated, it builds their argument even more if they pull somebody that is close to you that they know is going to agree with them. Now, most of the time, if they can aim for somebody that is close to them, they filed that information, they can pull that in, that strengthens their argument. They're going to do that 10 times out of 10. But ultimately, they are going to pick somebody that before they even bring them in, they are pretty sure that they are going to agree with the narcissist. So the closer to the victim, the receiving end, the closer you can get to that person, the less they're going to challenge it because, the victim wants to preserve that relationship with their best friend or that person. Um, but ultimately, it's who can I bring into this argument that is going to strengthen the narcissist argument so strong that you can't argue with me. And then I get to end this conversation being right. And it might be about something that doesn't really apply to your life that much, like Taylor Swift. It might be about something that is a really big deal in your life. And it's you're probably not going to question that the closer they are to you. So 10 out of 10 times, if they can pick someone close to the victim, they are going to. but they're going to be pretty sure before they pull that person in that they're going to agree with the narcissist.
And that makes sense. That's why I asked that question, because to
Yeah.
me, as I'm listening to you, I was going, okay, this seems like a strategy. If I'm
Yep.
trying to, like, it's a stretch. If I'm
Yeah.
trying to think about the strategies that they would use,
Yep.
how, that seemed to make the most sense to me.
Yep.
Because then if it is a more sensitive or a more serious topic, that
Mm-hmm.
can then begin to whittle away at the strength of the relationship of that person that you're close with as the
Yes.
victim of the narcissist abuse. And that ties
Yep.
into their other strategies of isolating you,
Yep.
minimizing your circle,
Yep.
all of those things. Okay, so let's talk about triangulation. I know we
Mm-hmm.
talked about it specifically with the three people,
Yeah.
specific people, like individual one, individual two, individual three.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that third person or party is a bunch of imaginary people,
Mm-hmm.
a group of
Mm-hmm.
imaginary people, right? And I think as long as we're on Taylor Swift, in her song, that's kind of, I think, what she's referring to. Well, everybody agrees, everybody agrees. So
Mm-hmm.
let me use an example, since I know we've been talking a lot about romantic relationships.
Mm-hmm.
How about my colleague that was extremely abusive to me, pulled me in, acted like we were super close friends, and then did a whole slew of horrible things
Mm-hmm.
when I was in this role. So let's just start out with the first sentence. This was a text message that I received from her. Sorry to bother you on a Saturday, but I'm just flying back. So we had all been at a work meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she had to stay for another meeting. So it was like emphasizing that she's a victim,
Mm-hmm.
that, because she was still working. But
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to wait to send you this message. So sorry to bother you on a Saturday, but I'm going to anyway because I'm still working.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no
Mm-hmm.
boundaries, right?
Mm-hmm.
I know things have not been great for us for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that noise from others has not helped.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so this is a form of triangulation when you're bringing in a bunch of, and like some people might read that and not think too much of it. I
Mm-hmm.
knew immediately what she was doing. She was trying to get me to question, well,
Mm-hmm.
who else? Who, like, noise from others. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you mean? Who else who's talking about me at work, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's what the goal was. And I,
Mm-hmm.
luckily, at this point, I had spent enough time doing the work that I do to understand these tactics and the manipulation behind it, that I
Yep.
saw right through it. Like, I
Yep.
could smell it from 30,000 feet in the sky. Uh,
Yes. Yep.
um, but I think that's what makes triangulation tricky.
Mm-hmm.
And I love
Mm-hmm.
in your article, you talk about, we'll get to this in a little bit, about how to navigate it,
Yep.
how to
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge it, recognize it so that you
Mm-hmm.
can navigate it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but do you have any thoughts on that, or anything to say? Kind of, I just wanted to use it as an example because
Yeah.
I don't know that everybody would kind of recognize that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think just bringing this up of some people might read that and not think twice about it. I always like to emphasize that their narcissists are sneaky, right? And, if you're understanding, you're recognizing, they think that you might be onto them a little bit, they're going to get sneakier, right? So that again, if you show this to other people and other people question you, okay, that's a triangulation right there, right? Triangulation with people they don't even know you're going to go talk to, right? But so much of narcissistic abuse and recognizing these really unhealthy manipulation tactics, it's sneaky on purpose. And so I always like to say, listen to your gut. We can take anything out of context and it looks very different. But if you read that and you knew that this person has ulterior motives, just listen to your gut. Whether they're a narcissist or not, for everybody listening out there, if it doesn't feel good and like a healthy dynamic, like maybe you apply the narcissistic label, maybe you don't, but like listen to your gut, right? Because you know the context. So if it doesn't feel good, doesn't feel good. Just take note of that and take steps after that, right? But I do think this brings up a really great topic of triangulation. We do usually think of it as three people, and it can be this very vague third person or third thing that comes in to mediate the argument, right? So it can be you, it can be your friend, and this faceless, unknown, everybody's talking about this, right? Like in the Taylor Swift song. And so you have to agree, everybody's talking about it, even though you have no idea who are those people, who's talking about me at work, right? So it can totally be that faceless third party people. I've even seen this with workplaces, like if there's a narcissistic boss and, you're getting all their tactics and stuff, it can be, well, the policy at work says this thing. And like my hands are tied, I can't do anything. Right. So going from I'm enforcing this policy that is maybe awful. And then, well, my hands are tied, slipping into the victim role, right? And like now you're the bad guy for bringing this up to me when I feel so bad that I can't change it for you. And so slipping around in that triangle in the different roles, right? But it can absolutely be a third thing or a third group of people that we maybe can't clearly identify or articulate as a person. So yeah, it's not always so cut and dry as three people. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. Yeah.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that because I think that really helps shed a lot of light on how complicated and how slippery,
Yeah.
it can be a slippery slope and it can,
Mhm.
feel because like you're saying, they're very sneaky. And the
Mhm.
more you start to notice it, and I'll say with this colleague, this was not an isolated incident.
Sure.
I had pages and pages of documentation of
Mhm.
inappropriate boundary busting, inappropriate behavior. This colleague had used triangulation with me previous to this.
Yep.
When she called me at 5:38 p.m. on New Year's Eve to
Mhm.
tell me that she doesn't like my social media because it wasn't all work related.
Mhm.
And other people,
Mhm.
had also said that my social media bothers them, and I was like, "Cool, unfollow me."
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that brings up a really great point too of like listen to your gut because there can be isolated incidents where you get triangulated and it doesn't feel great, right? And that maybe doesn't mean that it's a narcissist. But if you have a lot of these, if this is a pattern of behavior, it's happening probably with other people in the office. Yeah, that person, hey, hi, that person's the problem, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're dealing with a true narcissist, it's going to be happening in lots of relationships, it's going to be happening pretty consistently. But there are totally times where you can be in an unhealthy triangulation situation and it doesn't feel good. And yeah, you still need to step up and set your own boundaries and advocate for yourself. But usually, yeah, there's a whole lot of incidents with a narcissist that it's happening with lots of people. It's happening with you all the time. It's a consistent pattern of behavior if it's a narcissist. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a great point because, like you said, triangulation isn't always a bad thing.
Hmm.
And if you get into a situation of triangulation, people with normal, healthy relationships and boundaries might be able
Hmm.
to say, hey, you know what? I understand that you're trying to bring in this other person, but I'd really like to resolve this just between you and I.
Yeah.
And if it's not in a narcissistic, controlling, manipulative way, that other
Hmm.
healthy person might say, you know what? You're right. Yeah, I apologize, right?
Hmm.
Like taking accountability, apologizing, those are things that a narcissist wouldn't do.
Yeah.
And then kind of watching for it becoming a pattern. If this happens one time, like you said, and then you can resolve it and move on, that's very different than kind of what we're
Hmm.
talking about and addressing here today.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yep.
So, in addition to romantic
Hmm.
relationships and bosses and colleagues at work,
Hmm. Hmm.
upbringing and family. I know at the
Yeah.
start of the show, I mentioned the term golden child.
Hmm.
And this is a tough one. And it's
Hmm.
hard when, especially as children, and like I am so sensitive to this being the
Hmm.
child of a narcissistic parent.
Yep.
It's painful to see,
Hmm.
in other people, especially because kids are so innocent and
Yeah.
they don't
Hmm.
know oftentimes what they're experiencing. And
Yeah.
for me, well, even in my, 20s and 30s, I knew that having a relationship with my mom was unhealthy for me.
Yeah.
And I didn't have a relationship with her for a long time, and then I brought her back in, and it took less than a year for me to officially decide for the last time in my life to go no contact because I have done the work, I've done the healing, I've
Mhm.
gained a deep understanding of these behaviors, the toxic and abusive
Mhm.
behaviors and people in my life and these
Yeah.
manipulative tactics that I did go no contact with her 2 years ago, just over two
Mhm.
years ago. And I really, really related to a lot of what you had in your article about this. So, can we talk about what that looks like? And
Mhm.
and I know the golden child kind of makes light of it a little bit, but it can be really
Sure.
serious and the impacts that it has on the mental health of children of
Mhm.
narcissistic parents. So, I'm just going to turn it over to you to dive
Sure.
into a little bit deeper conversation about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the first thing that I always like to acknowledge when it comes to family dysfunction, and if there's particularly a parent is the narcissist, I always like to acknowledge that there's a huge power differential, right, between the parents and the kids. And it is the parent's job when you become a parent, it is your job to always be the most mature person in the room. Like that's what you sign up for when you become a parent, or you should know you're signing up for that when you become a parent. Um, and that includes modeling healthy relationships, healthy communication. And so the tricky thing is when the narcissist in a family is the parent, they have control just by the inherent power differentials between parent and child. They have control of so much of the situation, right? And again, when a narcissist is doing their narcissistic thing, it's showing up in all their relationships, right? So if the parent is the narcissist, kids are not only exposed to like one of the kids, there's more than one. One of the kids is the golden child, and one of them is the problem child, the scapegoat. But also, kids get exposed to struggles within a narcissist's relationship with their partner, and triangulation can happen there. And so I like to start with this is so hard because kids inherently don't have a lot of power when there's kid and parent dynamics. And also they just don't know, right? Like parents are supposed to be modeling that. And so if you're getting narcissistic behaviors modeled, you don't know any better. You go out into the world thinking that that's normal. And, I just have to navigate that. And that's how people are. And it can really set you up for a lifetime of hurt and a long time of hurt. But I digress. I'm getting off topic. So as far as dynamics within a family, it's really common for, if a narcissistic parent is struggling with the other parent, maybe the other parent is trying to set a boundary or is pulling away or is not being the kind of partner the narcissist wants. It's not uncommon for the narcissistic parent to bring in a kid to, either play the role of the partner that the narcissistic parent wants, or to, be the venting ground for that other parent sucks so bad, and like the kid plays the therapist, or to be the go between communication from the narcissistic parent that is now giving the silent treatment, the cold shoulder. Um, Kid, you go talk to the other parent. You relay my feelings and communicate what I'm wanting them to know. And so, it in this dynamic within the family, and I think we can get into siblings a little bit more in a minute, but within this dynamic, this is so problematic because a kid is a kid and a kid needs to be a kid. Um, but the narcissistic parent is pulling the kid up to an adult level, giving them adult problems, and expecting a kid to operate relationally in an adult way when we don't have the brain development for that. We don't have the maturity for that. And so it really just puts the kid in this impossible situation. So, one of the really tough dynamics is narcissistic parent and kids getting pulled in as the mediator to adult issues and adult relationships.
Yes. And
Mhm.
yes, and
Mhm.
in addition, I think where this can get really tricky, and again, I have a whole episode with another therapist. It's like it's one of the top episodes of the entire season season one and season two of Drinking with Jen. With another therapist, we talk about co-parenting with a
Yep.
narcissist. And
Mhm.
so that's where it can get even more tricky. And I'll tell you, I see this with my ex all the time
Mhm.
because I'm still really close with the kids and their mother. And, he'll use material things,
Mhm.
even though he doesn't have, what's the saying, a pot to piss in.
Yep.
But then he'll use, doesn't pay his bills, but then will buy the kids new iPhones, doesn't spend time with them.
Mhm.
But then it's, and I think some of these things, like when you have a checklist of things in your article, and I was like,
Mhm.
yep, yep. Like
Yep.
literally everything. Or this one I think is really tricky, then like asking questions about the other parent. Oh, well,
Mhm.
is your mom dating anybody?
Yep.
Oh,
Mhm.
well, why not? I don't understand why she doesn't get back out there. Really, you
Mhm.
don't? Oh, you don't understand after she was with you why she's not
Yeah.
interested in dating anybody?
Yeah.
But
Mhm.
it's those little, like you said, those little, if anyone's ever watched, the show Kim's Convenience. Oh my gosh, I love that show. It's over now, but there's one of the characters, they always call it a sneak attack.
Mhm.
And that just like popped in my mind because you used the word sneaky a few times. But I
Yep.
think you're talking about it as as a family that might still be together living in a
Yep.
household. But then if the parents do separate and now you've got these kids ping-ponging back and forth between the narcissistic parent and then going back home to the parent that has healthy relationships and healthy boundaries,
Mhm.
um, that creates another whole triangulation right there.
Yeah.
And that makes it that much more tricky. And you hear a lot of parents say, gosh, they go spend time with a narcissistic parent for
Mhm.
1 or 2 nights. And then
Mhm.
I'm spending the next 4 or 5 days undoing everything that's been done. And then they turn around and
Yeah.
they go back. Right. So it
Yeah.
can kind of turn into this vicious triangulation cycle.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. 100%. And, please don't. My heart goes out. Anybody who's listening, my heart so goes out if you're trying to co-parent with a narcissist. It is so difficult. It is, testing you without, you broke contact with that person, you broke that relationship with that person, and they are still forcing you to be subject to their manipulation tactics. It is so hard, especially when there's kids in the picture and you just love and care about them so much. And to watch them be exposed to this, and that they're kids and that they don't know, it is so hard. And I also like to remind anybody that if you are trying to co-parent with a narcissist, is when your kids come back to you and they're dysregulated and they're bouncing off the walls and all those things. I used to work with kids, and I always remind parents that kids tend to act out in the environment that they feel the safest. So if they are dysregulating at your house, it's because they feel safe enough to do so. It's you have got me, right?
Mm,
Versus they go over to the narcissistic parent's house and there's fear and there's control there. And it's if you better behave or else, right? Or else what? It depends on the narcissist. But I always like to remind parents that it is so hard. It tests you so much. And if they're freaking out at your house a little bit, again, it's because they feel safe enough to do so. But we didn't even get into that. And that takes this entire power dynamic situation and makes it so much harder and so much more complicated. And oh my gosh, my heart just goes out to everybody doing that because it's so tough. Yeah. And it's over and over again. Yeah.
yeah. And honestly, I think that's a really, and I think that's why it's such a top listened to episode because a lot of
Mhm.
people are dealing with that. And
Yeah.
therapy is a really great place to start to help get tips and tricks and how to do it, like how to best support your
Mhm.
children, how
Yep.
best to not fall into that triangulation trap, like
Yep.
how to be there for them. So if you're
Yeah.
struggling with that, a lot of listeners will reach out to me and be like, "Is there a therapist that you recommend?" So
Mhm.
I have a lot of great ones that come in and guest on the show, like you, Maggie. So
Yep. Absolutely.
um, all right. So you did mention that we want to touch on siblings.
For
Uh,
sure. Yeah.
let's go there.
Yeah, let's do it. And so you brought up this term of golden child earlier, and this can just be present in dysfunctional families in general, but it's pretty much always going to be present, especially if there's a narcissistic parent. But if one of the siblings is a narcissist, that's going to come online too. But when we're looking at narcissism, let's start with a narcissistic parent and how golden child stuff comes in. So, if you have a narcissistic parent and pulling into a triangle situation, it's all about power, right? And so I am right if I pit these siblings against each other. What that ends up doing for a narcissistic parent is it sets the standard for if you are the quote unquote golden child, you get the good attention from that narcissistic parent. Like you get the good stuff, you get the rewards. And so it creates this dynamic of I need to strive for that parent's approval, right? Which gives the narcissistic parent power and control. Everybody's striving for my approval, whatever I say they're going to do, you know? And so if one kid is set up as the golden child, it leaves all the other kids in the family striving to get that elusive golden child trophy, right? Now, sometimes there's also a kid that is designated as the problem child. And, that can also be called the family scapegoat. But that also gives all the kids in the family motivation for, I don't want to be that person. And the narcissistic parent has identified that that behavior makes you a scapegoat. This behavior makes you a golden child. You all of a sudden now have a playbook for what is expected of you as a kid and how to strive, how to succeed and get the good approval and how to quote unquote fail and be the problem child. And you get all the punishments and the bad stuff from the parent. So with a parent this is usually about pitting the siblings against each other for the parent's approval. And then you're too busy fighting amongst yourself to be able to notice that the narcissist is the problematic one, right? So you're too busy doing that to focus on how I'm actually the problem here, right? Now, there's also a dynamic where one of the siblings is a narcissist, right? And so this comes down to power and control again, right? Of that narcissistic sibling is positing themselves as the golden child so that, again, they get all the rewards, but they also get the parents' approval is already there. So they kind of get whatever they want, right? Like I have power over my siblings because the parent is listening to me. And this dynamic doesn't require there to be a narcissistic parent. There can just be a narcissistic sibling. But this is about power and those power hierarchies and being at the top again. So yeah, absolutely. It's about getting the power of that parent's approval, whether they're a narcissist or not.
Can I just say, that sounds exhausting.
It is.
I
Yeah.
mean, oh my gosh, that
Yeah.
sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
All right. So we've talked about in the workplace, romantic relationships,
Yep.
parents, families, co-parenting, siblings.
Mhm.
I would be remiss because I do, I've talked in other episodes about gray rocking and
Mhm.
red flags for toxic friendships.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I've experienced this as well, with
Mhm.
a former friend. But what for me, a big part of this experience and this journey was once I recognized the toxic behaviors and people in my life,
Mhm.
it sort of became like a game of whack-a-mole. Remember that old
Yeah.
game? It
Oh,
was like you
yeah.
knock one down and then another one like rears its ugly head bigger
Mhm.
and then you become more aware. Then it's like they're kind of that most toxic person until you figure it out. And then, it's like kind of
Yeah.
weeding it out. I think I have conquered the game at this point.
You made
Uh,
it.
I made it. I made it top score.
Mhm.
But I had a friend who would use triangulation all the time. Now,
Yeah.
this can be as simple as I always say, if one of your close friends is gossiping about their other close friends to you,
Mhm.
you better believe they're gossiping about you to them.
Yep. Mhm.
And one of the things that I noticed with this very toxic, unhealthy friend of mine that I had to gray rock out of my life was there was two of us that were her main best friends,
Mhm.
but that role constantly shift.
Mm.
Ginny's the best friend this week. Oh, nope,
Mhm.
you did something that I don't like.
Mhm.
You stood up to me. You called me out on my
Mhm.
bad behavior. So now Nancy is my best friend.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that would and would do it in front of us.
Mhm.
Like we actually went on a vacation together and in
Mhm.
front of this other friend,
Mhm.
um, she would say, Ginny's my best friend. And it was
Mhm.
so uncomfortable for me. I felt
Mhm.
terrible for her.
Yeah.
And and I don't think I recognized what that actual behavior was at the
Mhm.
time. I
Yep.
just knew it felt awful.
Yep. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. And I always like to remind people that with narcissism, it can be helpful to think of that person as like very young emotionally. Like put them in elementary school emotionally, right? Because that is something that like an elementary kid does, right? Of like, you're my best friend. No, you're my best friend, and like letting everybody know. Um, but yeah, that ultimately comes back to it does not feel good. That's a really immature thing for somebody to do. But that comes back to power, right? Of, you are seeking, that's almost a reenactment if we were to apply it to the narcissistic parent, pitting the siblings against each other, of like, you need to be seeking my approval, right? To be the best friend, to be the top friend. And it feels really uncomfortable for everybody else because it's not a mature way to show up in relationships. It's not healthy. And ultimately, there's no winning. Like, if you are the best friend, now you feel bad for the other friend. Like, that sucks. And if you're not the best friend, the top friend, that sucks too. And so the only person that wins in that situation is the narcissist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And it's so interesting. Here's one thing I'll say, and as we kind of shift to wrap up, because you have some really great tips, because we don't
Hmm.
talk about just problems here on Drinking
Yeah.
with Jen. We talk about the solutions,
Yep.
what to do, how to navigate when you're in this. But I think, I
Hmm.
just wanted to be really vulnerable and open there for a second that
Yeah.
in that moment, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew it
Yeah.
felt icky, right?
Yep. Hmm.
And I think that's why I wanted to have this conversation today so that we could understand and
Yeah.
recognize that this is what was going on. And
Yeah.
in the future, kind of equip you with some tools and tips and tricks to
Yep.
navigate when triangulation is happening.
Yeah. For sure.
Um, and, for me, I ended up, and I just want to share this really quickly before we
Hmm.
transition to that. Like I mentioned, I did gray rock that friend out of my life. Now,
Yeah.
it was time. And one of the things that I have learned through doing a little house cleaning
Hmm.
in my community and the people that are around me is what that did. Those toxic relationships suck up so much of your energy and your emotions and your time.
Mhm,
And once you remove them, it can feel really scary, right? Because
mhm,
narcissists love to threaten you and get you to
mhm,
react and be anxious about confronting them or having
mm,
difficult conversations. But when you remove them and if you
mhm,
get to that point, what starts to happen is by removing that toxic energy, things start to shift to the good and you
mm,
create more space in your life for the healthy relationships. You're now investing in those. And then the healthy relationships begin to flourish and
mhm,
strengthen and deepen. And you
mhm.
have more enriching, fulfilling relationships in your life. And I'm
Yeah,
saying that from my own personal experience. But
mm,
I love that you're nodding your head and you're ahhing
mhm.
along that this hopefully is something that you see with your patients that you treat also.
Yeah, yeah. And, I think you spoke to something really powerful in there of it is really scary to end a relationship with a narcissist or to consider ending one. There is threats, and sometimes those threats do come true. I'm not going to sugarcoat that of like sometimes they're like, well, all of our friends are going to agree with me and they're going to side with me and be friends with me. Yeah, sometimes that happens. I can't sugarcoat that. And also, if a friend is willing to put up with that behavior and is going to choose that side and go, I know this is really hard if you haven't broken those relationships off yet, but just trust me, let them go, because then you're probably spending a lot of time trying to convince that friend that goes with them. It does free up so much space in your life. And, maybe the narcissist takes a lot of people out of your life. Okay, now you have a lot of space that you get to fill with healthy relationships. And sometimes those threats come true. I don't want to sugarcoat that. And it can be really hard and it can be really scary. And it is also an opportunity to build a life that works a lot better for you because friendships shouldn't be hard. There are hard seasons and we get through those together, and there can be rocky relational issues that we might have to work through with a friend, but Friends are meant to enrich your life. They're meant to make it better, right? So are family relationships. They're supposed to be ones that are in your corner. And if they are feeling icky, listen to that ick. There is something that is happening there. Maybe it's narcissistic triangulation, maybe it's not, but listen to that ick. Like that is giving you information on something that you need, something that you want. But it is so scary and
Yeah.
hard because there is a lot of threats, and those threats have some validity to them. Otherwise, you wouldn't be
Yeah.
scared of them. So,
It's
yeah.
true. They can, some narcissists can be really vindictive.
Hmm.
And, that's unfortunate. I
Hmm.
think that it's so interesting. Hindsight is always 2020, right?
Sure.
And, as I gray rocked this friend out,
Hmm.
eventually my other friend who we were in the little triangulation, the best friends that some
Yep.
days you were, some days you weren't. She had a situation just a couple of months after this friend cut me off.
Hmm.
Um, the slow drip of gray rocking,
Yep.
and she literally sat for like 5 hours at home anxious about sending this friend a text message.
Hmm.
And she finally did, and it ended up ending their friendship. And now we talk about it and in some ways kind of giggle, like,
Hmm.
I can't believe I sat there for 5 hours and let myself feel like that over sending somebody a text message. Like, it's just interesting. And what's beautiful about it now is you have that perspective to go, huh, I no longer have that in my life.
Yeah.
And but it can feel like that in the moment. And for me,
Yep.
I had a little bit, head start on her. And I was like, just send the text message. Just send the text message. I promise it's going to feel
Hmm.
like you climbed to the top of the mountain that you've been training to climb your whole life. It's going to feel so freeing and liberating. And ultimately it did. But in that moment, just know that, like, we hear you, we see you. It can feel really overwhelming when you're dealing with these narcissistic relationships. So I know in your kind of tips and tricks, that's one of them, is know when the time is right to leave a narcissistic relationship behind, if that is an option for you. And we realize that's not always an option. So what are some other tips and tricks that people can do when they recognize that they are experiencing this triangulation?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think that phrase, recognize when triangulation is happening, that's the hardest thing, right? Listening to that ick feeling, recognizing what's happening, that's the hardest part. If you already have begun to recognize that, hey, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Now we can do some of these other things that I'm going to mention, but I don't want to underestimate how hard that can be. And that is a lot of work. And listen to that ick, figure it out, read about it, educate yourself, listen to podcasts like this that give you lots of examples of ways that this can show up in your life in lots of different environments. Equip yourself with knowledge, first of all, right? Like, because realizing it is the hardest part, because you can't do anything else until you recognize who it's happening with and when is it happening. So that's step number one, right? um I think the second step too is, as you are doing this, realizing, kind of examining, what is the role that you usually get pulled into with triangulation, right? If you are a sucker for mediating because you like to help people get along better, that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing about you, but it can definitely be a blind spot that a narcissist exploits. So, as you're recognizing triangulation with a narcissist, also look at what role do they usually pull you into. And so then that's one that you need to have on your radar for times that, maybe even in relationships not with narcissists, you got to watch out for that, right? So looking at the role that you usually play in the triangle, or most often that's your entry point into the triangle. Take a look at that, accept it. It doesn't have to be a bad thing, but it can be exploited if it's not on your radar, right? So that would be number two, with like learning about it. Um, and then once you recognize it's happening, once you know how you are contributing to the triangle, because it takes three to triangle, once you recognize that, then you can start doing some more active stuff. I usually suggest first to have a direct and private conversation, especially with the narcissist, if there is typically a third person that's getting pulled in. So, the example with your two friends, you can have a direct private conversation with both of those people. But directly highlighting to the narcissist that this is not okay. I'm not going to continue to engage in this. So I want to give you a heads up. If you continue to do this, I'm going to disengage. I'm not going to be handling our issues with a crowd, you know? So kind of setting the stage for the boundary that you're probably going to have to reinforce later. It's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to suck. It's also then you get to know that if you have to reinforce that boundary later, that you didn't blindside them with that, as a narcissist will say that, like, so having a conversation to really set the expectations, call the behavior out, prepare for them to react, prepare for them to get really pissed off. And this is still so that you get to sit with the knowledge of like, I did this right. I was the mature person here, and whatever happens, happens. Right. Um, and so once you do that, they're probably going to get pissed off. When you reinforce and hold that boundary, they're probably also going to get pissed off. And so I like to use the phrase responding instead of reacting. And this takes a lot of practice in these situations and not in these situations, right? We react when something threatens us, whether it's actual physical harm or just emotionally threatens. This is tough. This is my job as a therapist, is to help people hone in on this skill. But responding, I usually define as you are intentionally responding in a way that aligns with who you want to be and how you want to show up in the world. Versus reacting is just kind of doing whatever comes up first to protect yourself, right? So a narcissist poses a threat. Reacting is to like, oh my gosh, I'm rolling into damage control. I need to protect the friendship with the other friend. I need to really just react and buffer myself from that threat. Versus responding might look something like, if you want to show up as a calm, regulated person, responding would look like, this is that triangulation we talked about, and I'm not going to participate in this, and I'm not going to do a bunch of damage control. If you go talk to the third friend and want to vent about it, great, go do that. Lean on your friendship. I'm not going to be sucked into this. So responding is coming from this place of regulation and showing up how you would be proud afterward, because that's who you want to be.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
Because I think this topic is critically important. In fact, just this morning, I reshared a post on Instagram in my stories from Corey Allen on this topic. And I think it's important to note that if you are someone that has been experiencing narcissist abuse
Mm-hmm.
for any period of time, especially an extended period of time,
Mm-hmm.
narcissists intentionally provoke you to get a reaction so that they can blame your reaction as the problem and not their bad behavior.
Yeah.
And that is something that is a conditioned behavior and coping mechanism that narcissist abuse victims can develop over
Mm-hmm.
time. And so this is something that, don't beat yourself up about it. It takes
Yeah.
time to reverse it. And then
Yeah.
also, especially if you are a child of a narcissistic parent, you're always doing that people pleasing.
Yep.
And you just want to do good, and you want to be the best, and you want to make everybody happy. And
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes it's hard to take criticism, right? And
Yeah.
that you can react. So one of the things that's really helped me is meditation and mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
It has helped me become more calm, less
Mm-hmm.
reactive.
Mm-hmm.
It has just really, really helped me with this. So in addition to therapy being a really great option, I just wanted to throw that out again, just from my own personal experience, and put a
Yep.
little context around it, because like you said, this is a big one.
Mm-hmm.
And be patient with yourself, give yourself some grace as you work to kind of recondition new
Mm-hmm.
healthy behaviors like responding versus reacting, especially if you have been conditioned to react and be provoked for an extended period of time.
Absolutely. And mindfulness is key to that, to doing it in the moment for sure. Right. But something I tell my clients a lot of times is, okay, let's say the narcissist pushes your buttons and they get you because they know your buttons. And if you rehearse that afterward, how could I have responded instead of reacted? That's not a missed opportunity at all if you practice it afterward. Because if you practice afterward, maybe you don't start practicing it for a week afterward. the chances are next time you're going to practice it 5 days afterward and then 3 days afterward. And you get closer and closer to being able to do it in the moment when you practice and you build your confidence of, no, I do know what to say. And I could have reacted like this. That is a possibility. So yeah, it takes so much practice. This is so conditioned. And narcissists push on our most vulnerable feelings so that they can have control. They push on guilt. They push on shame. They push on fear. They push on anger, and sadness. And anything that you feel intensely is a tool for them. So really be gentle with yourself. Responding instead of reacting is really hard. And you get there by practicing, whether that's in the moment, that's beforehand with meditation and mindfulness, which is such a wonderful tool to bring in there. Thank you so much. But it's also helpful to practice afterward too. Yeah. Mhm. And so I think as we're talking about this is, setting your boundaries. That's another thing that you can do beforehand as you're doing, as you're being mindful, as you're doing meditation on like, what does my best life look like? And so I think this rolls in really nicely too with afterward. You can also work on these two of like, where do I want the limitations to be with this narcissist? Um, in some situations, you might be able to navigate and not go no contact if it's a narcissist and they are not working on their own stuff, which is very rare, by the way, for everybody listening, um, you know, in that case, you're going to need really, really strong boundaries. And you're only going to recognize where those boundaries are by listening to that ick and by rehearsing what would have been reacting instead of responding. Right. So I think this rolls in really well to the next one that I usually suggest for people of like, you got to build your own boundaries. You can't let the narcissist play any role in that boundary structuring. And you have to really hold yourself firm to that, which again takes responding instead of reacting, because sometimes the hardest boundaries with a narcissist is our own self boundaries of, I'm not going to go into that triangle situation. I'm not going to re-engage in this. And so this actually plays really nicely with the next one I usually suggest for people of setting your own boundaries and realizing where your limitations are. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yes, and I've done multiple podcasts on boundaries as well. Because, like I was just going to say, we could do a whole nother session just
Oh,
on, setting and creating boundaries. And I just like to
yeah.
always simplify it and say, because sometimes people think that boundaries are used as a offensive tool, and they're
Mm-hmm.
not. Really, boundaries are just for you to decide what you're willing to participate in and not.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's really pretty simple. It's only about you. It's not about anybody else or controlling anyone else.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. And I really like to use the language, especially with a narcissist, that will bring it to a black and white place. So like you're wrong or I'm wrong, and they can't be wrong, right? We can put in, there's a lot of levels to boundaries. Like you can put in a request and they can say, yes to that. They can say no to that. You can put in a request. You can set like a boundary of like, this is where my participation ends. And if those don't work, they usually don't with narcissists, then we get to a place of ultimatums. But narcissists like to give the narrative that all boundaries are ultimatums and you are hurting them. And this is black and white. If you set a boundary, you're actually setting an ultimatum, and that means that I'm wrong and I can't tolerate it. Right. So I also like to remind people in healthy relationships, there's lots of levels to boundaries, right? And so this doesn't have to be an ultimatum. It really is all about what you will and won't accept. And there's lots of levels that you can do that. There's lots of ways you can communicate that. But setting them for yourself, yeah, they're not always ultimatums.
Yeah, that's a great
Mm-hmm.
perspective. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. And I think we kind of already, oh, no. So you also talk about strengthening your own supports.
Yeah. Yeah,
What
for
do you
sure.
mean by that?
Yeah. So supports and support people can be anybody, right? This can be friends. This can be other family. This can be, for some people, it's a faith community or like a workout community or like a group of some sort. This can be a support group, like a therapeutic one. It's whoever is outside of that relationship and is going to help you to hold these boundaries, that is going to give you encouragement. Like we're really looking for supports to be healthy people. So because narcissists tear you down. And because they manipulate things, they really make you doubt yourself. They make you feel really isolated. A lot of times you feel like you've been through the ringer after a relationship with a narcissist, right? And so I like to think of who are the people that are going to hold you as you rebuild the life that you want to live. Those are your support people. And there's lots of different levels to that. Some of them are really close to you, some of them might be more acquaintances, but who are going to hold you and encourage you and build you back up. Um, we need to have a lot of those people in your corner. If you cut a relationship off with a narcissist and you're like, wow, everybody took their side and I have nobody now. Okay, let's just start gathering those people. And so, it's really, people can do it alone. I see it. I'm so proud of those people. So much strength. And also, it just is easier when you have people in your corner. So, have strengthening those, really giving time to those relationships, seeking those out, following up with them to build them. Whoever's gonna be there and be non-judgmental and be supporting you and cheering you on, we want to have those people in your corner and we want to be leaning on them because that's what they're there for. So that's probably the last big thing that I say as we're looking at how do I disengage from triangulation and sometimes disengage from this relationship altogether. You got to have people in your corner. And
Yeah,
and if you have nobody, it can be a therapist. That counts. Yeah.
absolutely. And
Mhm.
that I think it's important to remember that as part of one of their tactics is the isolation. And so it's
Mhm.
really important that you don't allow yourself to get isolated. And
Mhm.
I'm very passionate about people talking about and sharing their stories and experiences because
Mhm.
oftentimes when you are isolating and you feel alone, you're usually
Mhm.
not.
Yeah.
Usually people understand. It kind of creates that connection in your community, and it's really important, especially in that healing process.
Mhm.
And like you mentioned, it's, knowing when and if to leave the narcissistic relationship, if that's an option for you and
Yep.
choosing therapy.
Yep.
Um, we covered so much. Oh
Yeah.
my
We
gosh.
did.
I mean, I know our topic was just triangulation, but
Yeah.
there's so much within that. And I really hope that you feel like you got some helpful, beneficial tips, tricks, tools from Maggie here today, who
Mhm.
was so kind to come on and share her wealth of experience and knowledge with us, specifically around triangulation and with
Mhm.
narcissists, in particular. So, Maggie,
Mhm.
any final thoughts you have for us? I will link all of your information. I'll link this article. I will link your websites, your social
Mhm.
media, everything in the show notes so people can come find you and
Mhm.
our Washington State people can book therapy sessions with you.
Yep.
Any
Mhm.
final thoughts to share as we wrap up today?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing I like to emphasize is that people aren't alone. That isolation absolutely is a manipulation tool, gives them more control over you, gives them more access to you. And so, just the very fact that this podcast exists and the very fact that I write on narcissism all the time should show you that you are definitely not alone. You're just being made to feel alone. And so, first of all, you're not alone. Second of all, find your people. But also I just want to remind you because narcissists like to pull us away from this is listen to how you're feeling. Like listen to your inherent wisdom of what works for you and what doesn't work for you. That ick we talked about. That's speaking to you. That's information for you to listen to. What do you need? And so I just want to remind you that's your innate wisdom of you and returning to the home of yourself that a narcissist can't do. So they don't want you to do it. You're not alone. And also listen to your feelings. Like most of the time, it's signaling to you what you need. So it takes bravery and reach out to a bunch of people that have been through the same thing and they're going to cheer you on. So there's absolutely hope ahead for sure.
I love that. Ending on a spirit of hope. Thank you so much, Maggie, for being here today and sharing all of your great perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.